It's the silence that stays with you, not the noise of the shells, though that was loud enough to rattle your teeth right out of your gums. It's the silence that happened afterward, in those few minutes when the smoke was still thick and the world felt like it was holding its breath. I remember one morning in November of 1944. We were somewhere on the border of France and Germany, tucked into a tree line that looked more like a graveyard of splintered wood than a forest. The mud was that deep, cold kind that sucks the boots right off your feet if you aren't careful. We'd been trading shots with a German unit across a narrow valley for 3 days. It was miserable. You couldn't get warm and you couldn't get dry. Every time you tried to heat up a can of rations, a mortar would come whistling in to remind you that you weren't invited to lunch. My friend, a kid named Miller from Ohio, had just been hit in the shoulder by a sniper about an hour before. We dragged him back, but we were all on edge. We wanted blood. That's the truth of it. When you're 20 years old and you've watched your friends get torn apart, you don't think about politics or grand strategies. You just want to hurt the people who are hurting you. Then, the shooting just stopped. It wasn't a truce. It was just a lull. And out of the fog across that valley, 2 figures appeared. They weren't crouching. They weren't running. They were walking upright, shoulder to shoulder, carrying a heavy wooden stretcher between them. They were Germans. I could see the shape of their helmets even through the mist. My finger went right to the trigger of my M1. I had the sights lined up on the one in the lead. He looked exhausted. Even from that distance, I could see the way his head hung low. They were moving toward a cluster of trees where we knew their field hospital was set up. Behind them, a third man walked, holding a stick with a piece of white cloth tied to the end of it. It wasn't a flag of surrender. It was a flag of mercy. I looked down the line at the other boys in my squad. Every one of them had a rifle leveled at those 3 men. We had the advantage. We could have ended them in 3 seconds. They were out in the open, completely exposed. If we killed the stretcher bearers, that wounded man on the litter would die in the mud, and the Germans would have 2 more dead soldiers to bury. It was the logical thing to do if you wanted to win a war, but nobody pulled the trigger. We just watched. We watched them struggle through the knee-deep muck, slipping and sliding, trying their best not to drop the man they were carrying. The man on the stretcher had his arm hanging off the side, swinging back and forth like a pendulum. He looked like he was already gone, but they kept walking. Sarge was sitting in the foxhole next to me. He was a hard man from Pennsylvania, a coal miner before the war. He'd lost a brother at Kasserine Pass. He hated the Germans more than anyone I knew. I looked at him, waiting for the order to fire. He just sat there, chewing on a piece of dead grass, watching those boys move through the fog. He didn't say a word. He just put his hand on the barrel of my rifle and pushed it down an inch. That was it. No speech, no moral lecture, just a hand on a rifle. We sat there in the cold and let them pass. We let the enemy save one of their own so he could maybe live to fight us another day. It didn't make sense then, and sometimes it doesn't make sense now. But it was the only thing that felt human in a place that had forgotten what humanity was. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The war is a strange thing because it strips everything away until all you have left is the person standing next to you and the person trying to kill you. You'd think that would make you hate the enemy more, and in a way, it does. But it also makes you recognize them. You see them shivering in the same rain. You see them eating the same lousy food. You see them crying for their mothers when the shrapnel hits. After a while, the uniforms start to matter less than the skin underneath them. That day in the valley wasn't the only time I saw it happen. There was another time later on, near the end of the winter. We were pushing into a small village in Germany. Most of it was already rubble. We were clearing houses, which is the nastiest kind of work you can do. You never know what's behind a door. It could be a scared kid or a machine gun nest. I was moving up a set of stairs in a house that had lost half its roof. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I kicked open a bedroom door, and there was a German soldier sitting on the floor. He didn't have a helmet. He didn't even have a gun. He was sitting there with a field kit open, trying to wrap a bandage around his own leg. He'd been hit bad. The blood was everywhere, soaking into the wooden floorboards. When I burst in, he didn't reach for a weapon. He just looked up at me. He had these bright blue eyes, and he looked so young. He might have been 18, maybe 19. He just froze. I had my rifle pointed right at his chest. I could have pulled the trigger and moved on to the next room. That was the job. but he just held up a hand, a shaking, bloody hand, and pointed to a picture sitting on the floor next to him. It was a photo of a woman and two little girls. They were all smiling, standing in front of a stone house with flowers in the windows. He wasn't showing me a target, he was showing me why he wanted to live. I stood there for what felt like an hour, though I know it was only a few seconds. My squad was shouting downstairs. The world was exploding outside. And in that room, it was just me and a dying boy and a picture of a family I'd never meet. I didn't kill him. I reached into my jacket, pulled out my own extra bandage, and tossed it to him. I didn't say anything. I just turned around and walked out of the room. I told my sergeant the room was clear. I lied. I lied to my superior officer in the middle of a combat zone. If I'd been caught, I don't know what would have happened. But I knew that if I'd killed that boy, I wouldn't have been able to look at myself in the mirror for the rest of my life. I carry that lie with me even now, at 92 years old. It's one of the few things I'm actually proud of from that year. People think war is all about the big moments of bravery, the medals of honor, and the charging of hills. But for me, the war was about those small moments where you decided not to be a monster. It was about the times you chose to remember that the man on the other side was just as terrified and lost as you were. We did it because we had to believe that when it was over, there would be something left of us to go home to. If you killed everything in you that was kind, then there was no point in surviving. You'd just be a walking ghost. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I remember the smell of the Ardennes more than anything. It was a smell of frozen pine needles and rot. Everything was dying or already dead. We were stretched thin, and the Germans were throwing everything they had left at us. That was during the Bulge. We were low on ammunition, low on food, and most of us were suffering from trench foot. My feet felt like blocks of ice that someone was hitting with a hammer every time I took a step. We were holding a ridge, and the Germans were in the valley below. They'd send these patrols up at night to try and find a gap in our lines. One night, the fog was so thick you couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. I was on watch with a fellow named Henderson. He was a quiet guy from Georgia, used to talk about his daddy's peach orchard all the time. We heard something moving in the brush in front of us. It was a slow, dragging sound. We both clicked off our safeties. We waited. Then we heard a groan. It wasn't a halt or a comrade. It was just the sound of a man in a lot of pain. We didn't fire, we just stayed still. About 10 minutes later, the fog lifted just a hair and we saw them. Two Germans, no rifles in sight, dragging a third man between them. They were heading back toward their own lines, but they'd gotten turned around in the fog and walked right into us. They were maybe 20 feet away. We could have mowed them down before they even knew we were there. Henderson looked at me. I could see the sweat on his forehead, even though it was 10 degrees out. He whispered, "They ain't got no guns, Henry." I nodded. We just sat there in our foxhole, shivering, and watched them stumble past. One of the Germans looked right at our hole. I know he saw us. Our eyes met for a split second. He didn't scream. He didn't reach for a grenade. He just gave a tiny, almost invisible nod and kept dragging his friend through the snow. They disappeared into the white, and we never saw them again. Henderson and I never told the lieutenant. We just sat there and listened to the wind. Sometimes I wonder if that fellow made it back. I wonder if he ever told his family about the two Americans who sat in the dark and let him live. I'd like to think he did. I'd like to think that somewhere in Germany, there's a grandson or a great-granddaughter who exists because we decided that a man carrying his friend wasn't a target. It's a strange thing to think about, that your life can be defined by the things you didn't do just as much as the things you did. I spent a lot of years trying to forget the faces of the men I did kill. They come to me in dreams sometimes, blurry and gray. But the faces of the men I let go, they're clear as day. I remember the shape of that German's nose, the way his breath came out in little clouds of steam. I remember the gratitude in his eyes. It was a silent pact we made in the middle of a slaughterhouse. We were saying, not this time, not today. And in a world that was falling apart, that was a lot. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. There's a weight to a rifle that stays with you. Even now, if I pick up a broom or a cane, my hands automatically find the balance point, like I'm still carrying that M1 through the hedgerows. You get used to the weight, you get used to the dirt, but you never get used to the noise of a man dying. It's a sound that doesn't belong in nature. It's a jagged, ugly sound. That's why we didn't shoot the stretcher bearers, because every time you heard that sound, it took a little piece of you away. If you could stop it, even for the enemy, you did. It was like trying to keep a tiny candle lit in a hurricane. You knew the candle was probably going to go out anyway, but you shielded it with your hands because it was the only light you had. I remember a medic we had, a guy named Doc Shapiro. He was a small, wiry man from New York City. He didn't carry a gun, just his bags of morphine and bandages. He was the bravest man I ever knew. He'd run out into the middle of a firestorm to get to a boy who was screaming. He didn't care if the bullets were American or German, he just saw a body that needed fixing. One afternoon, we were pinned down in a wheat field. The Germans had a MG42 in a stone farmhouse at the edge of the field, and they were chewing us to pieces. Doc saw one of our guys, a kid named Peterson, go down about 30 yards out. Doc didn't even hesitate. He stood up and started running. He was wearing his helmet with the big red crosses on the side. But in the heat of a battle, those crosses don't always protect you. The Germans kept firing. They were hitting the dirt all around him. Then, something happened. The machine gun stopped. Just like that. The whole field went quiet. Doc reached Peterson, flipped him over, and started working on him. He stayed there for 10 minutes, out in the open, completely vulnerable. The Germans in that farmhouse could have picked him off with a pistol if they wanted to, but they didn't. They let him do his work. They waited until Doc had dragged Peterson back into the safety of the ditch before they started firing again. It was a professional courtesy, I suppose. Or maybe it was just respect. Even in the middle of all that hate, there was a rule that everyone understood. You don't kill the man who's trying to save lives. If you break that rule, then there's nothing left. You're just animals tearing at each other's throats. I think about Doc a lot. He didn't survive the war. He was killed a month later by a stray shell while he was sleeping in his tent. It felt like a betrayal. After all the times he'd stood up in the face of death and been spared, to be taken like that seemed wrong. But I guess that's the thing about war. It doesn't have a sense of justice. It just has a sense of timing. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I think about the mothers sometimes. I'm 92 now, and I've seen my own children and grandchildren grow up. I see the way their mothers look at them, with that fierce, protective love. And I realize that every man I saw in a gray uniform was someone's son. Every man on a stretcher was a boy who'd been tucked into bed once upon a time. When you're 19, you don't think about that. You think about the flag and the uniform and the orders. But when you get older, the perspective shifts. You realize that the enemy is just a word. The reality is a human being who's probably just as scared as you are. We had a German prisoner once, right after the breakthrough at St. Lo. He was just a kid, maybe 16. He'd been hiding in a cellar. He was shaking so hard he couldn't hold his canteen. We gave him some chocolate and a cigarette. He didn't speak English, and none of us spoke much German, but we sat there with him for a while. He showed us a picture of his dog, a big floppy-eared hound. He smiled when he talked about that dog. For a minute, we weren't soldiers. We were just boys talking about dogs. Then the MPs came and took him away, and we went back to the front. I wonder if he made it home to that dog. I hope he did. I really do. There's enough death in the world without adding to it when you don't have to. People ask me if I'm a hero. I tell them no. The heroes are the ones who didn't come back, the ones who gave everything. I'm just a guy who survived. And I survived because of luck, and because of the men around me, and maybe because of those moments of mercy. Maybe there's a balance to things. Maybe by letting someone else live, you earn a little bit of your own life. I don't know if that's true, but it's what I tell myself when the house is quiet and the memories start to creep in. I remember the stretchers, I remember the white flags, and I remember the silence of the guns. Those are the moments that mattered, not the killing, the not killing. That's what I want people to understand. In the middle of the worst thing humans can do to each other, we still found ways to be kind. We still found ways to say no to the darkness. And if we could do it then, in the mud and the blood of 1944, then there's hope for everyone. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The mud in France has a specific kind of stickiness to it. It's like it wants to keep everything that touches it. We spent weeks in that mud, moving through the hedgerows of Normandy. Every field was a fortress. You'd fight for 100 yards, lose 3 men, and then do it all over again in the next field. It was exhausting. It wore down your soul. One day, we found ourselves in a standoff near a small orchard. There was a stone wall between us and the Germans. We were so close we could hear them talking. We could hear them coughing. It's a strange thing to be that close to someone who's trying to kill you. You start to hear the individuality in their voices. One guy had a deep, booming laugh. Another one had a high-pitched sneeze. You start to give them names in your head. The laugher, the sneezer. You realize they aren't a force. They're just people. Around noon, the firing died down because it started to pour rain. Not just a drizzle, but a real soaking downpour. We were all huddled under our ponchos, trying to keep our powder dry. Suddenly, we heard a cry from the other side of the wall. It wasn't a battle cry. It was a scream of agony. One of their guys had been hit by a stray fragment earlier, and it looked like it had taken a turn for the worse. We heard them shouting for a medic. We heard the panic in their voices. Then, we saw a helmet peek over the wall. A German soldier stood up, holding a white bandage in the air. He looked right at our position. He didn't have his rifle. He just pointed toward the middle of the orchard where the wounded man was lying. Our Sarge stood up. We all grabbed our guns, thinking it was a trick, but Sarge just held up his hand. He looked at the German and nodded. The German climbed over the wall, followed by another man. They ran out into the mud, grabbed their friend, and dragged him back. We didn't fire a single shot. We just sat there in the rain and let them do it. For those 5 minutes, the war didn't exist. There was just a man in pain and his friends trying to help him. When they were back over the wall, the German who had stood up first appeared again. He waved once, a quick, sharp motion, and then disappeared. We didn't fire for the rest of the day. We couldn't. How do you shoot a man who just waved at you? How do you go back to killing after you've shared a moment of understanding like that? We moved out that night, and another unit took our place. I don't know what happened to the laugher or the sneezer, but I know that for one afternoon, we were better than the war. We were men again. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. It's hard for people today to understand the sheer scale of it. It wasn't just a few battles. It was a world on fire. Everywhere you looked, something was burning. But inside that fire, there were these little pockets of cold, hard reality. I remember being in a basement in a town called Aachen. We were resting for a few hours. The house above us was gone, just a shell. We found a stash of preserved peaches in jars. We sat there in the dark, eating peaches with our bayonets, and for a second, it felt like a picnic. Then a shell hit the street outside, and the dust fell from the ceiling, and we were back in it. You learn to live in those seconds. You learn that the future doesn't exist. There's only right now. And right now, you're alive. Right now, you have a peach. Right now, your friend is breathing. That's why you don't shoot the man with the stretcher, because you want someone to do the same for you. It's a selfish kind of mercy, maybe. You think, if I let him go, maybe God will let me go. You trade a life for a bit of hope. I saw a lot of men die who didn't deserve it. Good men. Men who were going to be doctors and lawyers and fathers. And I saw some men live who probably shouldn't have. War doesn't pick and choose based on merit. It's just a giant machine that grinds everything up. All you can do is try to keep your own gears from turning into rust. You try to keep a little bit of the person you were before you put on the uniform. My wife used to ask me why I never talked about the war when I first came home. I told her it was because I didn't have the words. But the truth was, I didn't want to bring it into our house. I didn't want the smell of the Ardennes in our bedroom. I didn't want the sound of the shells in our kitchen. I wanted to leave Henry Lawson the soldier in a box in the attic and just be Henry Lawson the husband. But you can't really do that. The soldier stays with you. He's there in the way you watch the door in a restaurant. He's there in the way you can't stand the sound of fireworks on the 4th of July. He's there in the way you look at a stretcher and see a human being instead of a target. I'm 92 years old now, and I'm finally okay with that. I'm okay with the fact that I carry those men with me. They're part of me. The ones I lost and the ones I spared, they're all part of the story. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. There was a day in the spring of 1945 near the end. We were in Germany, and things were breaking down. The German army was collapsing, and they were using everyone they could find. Old men, young boys. We came across a group of them defending a bridge. They didn't have a chance. We had tanks and air support. We could have blown that bridge to kingdom come. But we looked through our binoculars and saw that the soldiers on the other side were mostly grandfathers and kids who looked like they should be in middle school. They were terrified. You could see it in the way they held their rifles. They were shaking. Our commander, a captain named Miller, called for a ceasefire. He got on a loudspeaker and talked to them in broken German. He told them it was over. He told them to go home. He said, "We don't want to kill you. Just put down your guns and go to your families." We waited for a long time. The sun was setting, turning the river into a ribbon of gold. Then, one by one, they started leaning their rifles against the stone wall of the bridge. They didn't surrender to us. They just walked away. They walked into the woods and headed for their villages. We watched them go. We could have taken them as prisoners. We could have padded our numbers, but we just let them go home. Because what was the point? The war was won. Why make more widows and orphans in the final hour? That's a memory that stays sweet in my mind. The sight of those old men and boys walking away from the war. I like to think they got back in time for dinner. I like to think they lived long lives and told their grandkids about the Americans who didn't fire. That's the kind of victory that matters. Not the land you take, but the souls you save. My legs don't work like they used to, and my eyes are getting dim, but I can still see that bridge. I can still see the sun on the water. It was a good day. It was a day when we chose peace before the treaty was even signed. And in a life that's had a lot of dark days, I hold on to the bright ones like that. They're the ones that get you through the night. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. You have to understand, we weren't philosophers. We were just tired. By the time we hit the Hurtgen forest, the green hell, as some of the boys called it, we were beyond the point of talking about right and wrong. The Hurtgen was a dark, dense place where the trees were so thick the sun never really touched the ground. It was always twilight in there, even at noon, and it was filled with mines, those S-mines that would jump up and spray ball bearings everywhere. You didn't just walk through that forest, you survived it one step at a time. One afternoon, after a particularly nasty skirmish near a ridge, we were hunkered down in some shallow holes. The air was thick with the smell of splintered pine and cordite. About 50 yards away, in a gully, a German was screaming. He'd been hit in the legs, and he was caught in a patch of those mines. Every time he moved, he risked setting off another one. He was just a voice in the dark, wailing for help. It went on for an hour. It's a sound that gets under your skin, like a physical itch you can't scratch. One of my guys, a hothead named Russo, kept checking his sights. He wanted to put the kid out of his misery, but Sarge wouldn't let him. Sarge said, "We wait." And we did. Eventually, 2 Germans appeared from the tree line on the far side. They weren't carrying rifles. They were carrying a long pole with a white undershirt tied to it. They walked right into that minefield. I remember holding my breath, watching their boots. Every step they took could have been their last. They reached the boy, hoisted him up, and started the slow, agonizing walk back. I had my M1 leveled right at the chest of the guy in the lead. I could see the sweat beads on his upper lip, even in the cold. My finger was on the trigger. It would have been so easy. My brain was telling me, that's 2 more soldiers for the enemy. But my heart was saying, that's a man helping a friend. I didn't fire. Nobody did. We just watched them disappear back into the gray shadows. It wasn't until they were gone that I realized I'd been biting my lip so hard it was bleeding. We gave them that moment. And in return, we got to feel like human beings for 5 minutes. That was the trade. You don't shoot the man carrying the wounded, because if you do, you're admitting that there's no hope left for any of us. You're saying that the world is just a place where we kill and die, and nothing else matters. And I wasn't ready to believe that yet. I'm still not ready to believe it today. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The thing about the front line is that it's a very small world. You don't see the big maps the generals have. You see the hole in front of you, the man to your left, and the man to your right. And you see the enemy. Sometimes you see them so clearly you can tell what they had for dinner if they were lucky enough to have any. I remember a night in early December. The ground was frozen hard as stone. We were in a defensive position near a small farmhouse. It was quiet. That eerie kind of quiet where you feel like the whole world is listening to you breathe. I was on the midnight watch, and I heard a metallic clink coming from the direction of a stone well about 30 yards away. I raised my rifle, my heart hammering against my ribs. A figure emerged from the darkness. It was a German soldier, but he didn't have a weapon. He was carrying 2 empty buckets. He walked toward the well, his shoulders slumped, his head down. He looked like a man who was just done with everything. He got to the well, lowered the bucket, and I heard the splash of the water. I had him dead to rights. I could have dropped him and been back in my hole before the echo died out, but I just watched him. He filled both buckets, took a long drink from one of them, and then stood there for a second, looking up at the stars. I wondered what he was thinking. Was he thinking about his wife, his kids? Was he wondering if he'd ever see a star that wasn't over a battlefield? He picked up the buckets and started walking back to his lines. As he passed a gap in the stone wall, he stopped and looked right toward where I was hiding. He knew I was there. He had to know. He didn't run. He just stood there for a heartbeat, nodded once, very slowly, and then kept going. I didn't tell a soul about that. Not Henderson, not Sarge, nobody. It was a secret between me and a man who probably died a week later. But for that one night, the well was neutral ground. The water was for everyone. If I had shot him, the water would have tasted like blood for the rest of the war. That's the thing people don't get. You think you're killing the enemy, but you're also killing a part of yourself every time you pull that trigger. Some parts need to be killed, I suppose, if you want to survive. But some parts you have to protect with everything you've got. The part of me that let that man get his water is the part of me that was able to come home and be a father. It's the part that didn't turn to stone. We didn't shoot the wounded or the people helping them because we were desperate to keep that small, soft part of ourselves alive. Without it, we were just machines made of meat and bone. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. By the time Christmas of '44 rolled around, we were in the thick of the bulge. The snow was up to our waists in some places. I remember sitting in a foxhole on Christmas Eve, trying to share a single chocolate bar with 3 other guys. We were freezing, exhausted, and scared out of our wits. And then, from across the way, we heard it, singing. The Germans were singing Silent Night, in German, of course, Stille Nacht. Their voices were high and clear in the cold air. We sat there, rifles across our laps, and we listened. For those few minutes, nobody was an American and nobody was a German. We were just a bunch of cold, lonely boys who wanted to be home by the fireplace. When they finished, one of our guys started singing it back in English. For about half an hour, we went back and forth, singing carols across a field where we'd been killing each other the day before. It sounds like something out of a movie, I know, but it happened. The next morning, the sun came up and the shells started falling again. That's the tragedy of it. The humanity is there, but the war is bigger. The war is this giant, mindless beast that doesn't care about Christmas or songs. But we cared. We had to. I remember seeing a German medic later that day. He was trying to get to a man who'd been hit in the middle of a clearing. The machine guns were everywhere. Our side was firing, their side was firing. And this medic, he just stood up. He didn't have a flag, just his Red Cross armband. He walked out into that lead storm like he was walking through a park. And the strangest thing happened. The firing didn't stop all at once, but it tapered off. It was like the soldiers on both sides saw him and thought, not him, not this guy. He knelt down, did what he had to do, and dragged that wounded soldier back by his collar. As soon as he was clear, the noise started right back up. It was like a temporary bubble of sanity. We respected the medic because he was doing what we all wished we could do. He was fixing things instead of breaking them. In a world of breaking, the man who fixes is a king. We didn't shoot because we knew deep down that we might need him too, or someone like him. We were all just one bullet away from needing a man with a stretcher. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I remember a town in Germany, late in the war. I can't remember the name. They all started to look the same after a while. Rubble, dust, and the smell of old chimneys. We were clearing a street, and a sniper had us pinned down behind a collapsed brick wall. We couldn't move an inch without a bullet whizzing past. One of our new replacements, a kid named Billy, who couldn't have been more than 18, got spooked and tried to run for a doorway. He didn't make it. He took one in the hip and went down in the middle of the cobblestones. He was screaming for his mother. It's a sound that stays with you, a grown man or a boy trying to be a man, calling for his mother. We couldn't get to him. Every time we leaned out, the sniper would chip the bricks near our heads. Then, out of nowhere, a door opened in a house across the street. A woman came out. She wasn't a soldier, just a civilian in a gray wool coat. She walked right out to Billy. She didn't look at us, and she didn't look at where the sniper was. She just knelt down, put her hands on his face to quiet him, and started dragging him toward her door. I remember looking through my sights at the window where I thought the sniper was. I was ready to kill anything that moved in that window, but the sniper didn't fire. He let that woman save our boy. She got him inside and shut the door. We didn't see Billy again until after the town was cleared 2 days later. He was alive. That woman had patched him up as best she could. She didn't have to do that. We were the invaders. We were the ones blowing up her town. But she saw a boy in pain, and she acted. And the sniper, whoever he was, saw a woman doing a good deed, and he held his fire. Those are the moments that make you wonder about the world. We spent so much time and money and energy trying to destroy each other, but we couldn't quite stomp out that basic instinct to help. It's a powerful thing, that mercy. It's stronger than the hate, even if it doesn't always win. I think about that woman a lot. I wonder if she knew she was standing in the middle of 2 rifles that could have ended her life in a heartbeat. Or maybe she just didn't care. Maybe she decided that saving that boy was worth whatever happened next. I'd like to believe that. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. People ask me if the war changed me. How could it not? You don't go through that and come out the same. You carry the ghosts. But the ghosts aren't always bad. Some of them are the men I didn't shoot. I see them sometimes when I close my eyes. I see the stretcher bearers in the fog. I see the man at the well. I see the woman in the gray coat. They're like a balance on the scale. For every man I had to kill, there's a man I let live, and that helps me sleep. I remember a specific moment during the crossing of the Rhine. Everything was chaos. Boats, smoke, screaming. I climbed up a muddy bank and found myself face to face with a German officer. He was wounded, sitting against a tree. He had his Luger in his hand, but it was pointed at the ground. He looked at me, and I looked at him. I had my bayonet fixed. I could have ended it right there, but he just sighed and dropped the gun. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver pocket watch. He held it out to me. He wasn't offering a bribe. He was surrendering his time. He was saying, "I'm done, take it." I didn't take the watch. I took his gun, tossed it into the river, and pointed toward the rear where the prisoners were being gathered. He nodded, picked up a stick to use as a cane, and limped away. I kept his Luger for a while, not that one, a different one I found later. But I always thought about that watch. What was inside it? A picture? An engraving? It was his most prized possession, and he was ready to give it away just to see one more sunrise. That's what we were all fighting for, really. Not for the maps or the flags, but for the right to go home and check the time on our own watches. When you see a man carrying a wounded comrade, you're seeing that desire in its purest form. You're seeing a man say, "This life matters." And if you shoot him, you're saying that nothing matters. I couldn't live in a world where nothing mattered. So I held my fire. We all did, more often than the history books tell you. We were soldiers, yes. We did our duty, but we were also men. And a man knows when to stop. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I'm 92 now. My hands shake and I can't walk to the mailbox without getting winded. But inside my head, I'm still 20 years old, standing in a muddy field in France. I can still feel the cold rain on my neck. I can still smell the wet wool of my uniform. It never really goes away. And I'm glad it doesn't. Because if I forget, then those men I spared, their lives don't mean as much. Their survival is linked to my memory. I tell these stories because I want people to know that even in the worst places, there is light. You just have to be brave enough not to blow it out. We didn't shoot the stretcher bearers because we were holding on to our own humanity with white knuckles. We were terrified of losing it, because once it's gone, you can't just go to the supply sergeant and get more. Once you become a person who shoots the wounded, you stay that person forever. I didn't want to be that man. I wanted to be the man who came back to a small town in America, got a job, married a girl named Sarah, and raised 3 kids. I wanted to be a man who could hold a baby without his hands feeling dirty. And letting those Germans go, letting them carry their friends, letting them drink their water, letting them sing their songs, that was how I kept my hands clean, or as clean as they could be in a war. It was a choice we made every single day. The choice to be merciful when it would have been easier to be cruel. I hope that's what people remember. Not the battles, but the moments of peace in between them. That's where the real story is. That's where the truth of being a human being lies. I'm tired now, but I'm at peace. I've shared what I needed to share. I've carried these men for 80 years, and now I can let them go. I hope they lived good lives. I hope they were happy. And I hope they remember the Americans who sat in the dark and let them pass. Because I certainly remember them. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. By the time we crossed the border into Germany itself, the mood in the company had changed. It wasn't the same as France. In France, we were the liberators, the guys with the chocolate and the smiles. But in Germany, we were the invaders. We saw it in the eyes of the people looking out from their windows, if they still had windows. There was this cold, hard fear that followed us down every street. It made you tighter, more suspicious. You kept your thumb on the safety a little more than you did before. But even then, even with that tension, the rules didn't just disappear. They couldn't. I remember we were moving through a place called the Siegfried Line. It was a mess of concrete bunkers and dragon's teeth. The Germans had spent years building it, and they weren't about to just hand it over. We were taking a lot of fire from a pillbox on a ridge. We'd tried to flank it, but they had the angles covered. One of our boys, a fellow named Crawford from Kentucky, got hit bad in the leg while trying to crawl up a drainage ditch. He was pinned down in a spot where we couldn't get to him without someone else getting a hole in their head. We were shouting to him, telling him to stay low, but he was losing blood and starting to go into shock. He started to crawl out into the open, just out of pure delirium. We all braced ourselves, waiting for the machine gun from that pillbox to finish him off. We were actually yelling at the pillbox, "Don't do it! Don't you damn well do it!" as if they could hear us over the noise of the war. And then, the gun just went quiet. We didn't know why. Maybe it jammed, or maybe they ran out of belts. But Crawford just kept crawling, dragging that dead weight of a leg behind him. Suddenly, a German soldier popped his head up from a trench near the pillbox. He didn't fire. He looked at Crawford, then he looked at us. He stood up, just stood right up in plain sight, and waved his arms. Then he jumped down into the ditch, grabbed Crawford by the webbing of his jacket, and shoved him toward our lines. He gave him a push like you'd push a stalled car, and then he scrambled back into his hole. We didn't fire a single shot at him, not one. We dragged Crawford the rest of the way in, and for the next hour, neither side fired a shot at that ridge. It was like we'd both agreed that the day had seen enough blood. You don't forget a thing like that. You don't forget the man who risks his life to save your friend, especially when he's the one who's supposed to be killing you. It's those moments that stick in your craw when people talk about the enemy. I suppose that's why I never had it in me to shoot a man who was clearly done with the fight. If a man was carrying a litter, or if he was helping a buddy limp to the rear, he wasn't a soldier anymore. He was just a person trying to keep a little bit of life from leaking out into the dirt. And God knows there was enough life leaking out into the dirt in 1945. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I remember another time, closer to the end, when the winter was finally starting to break. The snow was turning into that gray slush that gets into everything. We were clearing a small hamlet, and we'd pushed the Germans back into a wooded area on the far side of a creek. There was a bridge, of course. There's always a bridge in these stories. This one was small, made of stone, probably been there for 300 years. We were on one side, they were on the other. It was a standoff. Every time a leaf moved, someone would spray the bushes with a bar. Then, through the smoke, we saw a young German medic walk onto the bridge. He was wearing a white coat over his uniform, which made him stand out like a sore thumb against the brown mud. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't even have a helmet on. He just had a medical bag and a look on his face that I can only describe as exhausted. He walked to the middle of the bridge, knelt down, and started working on a soldier who had been hit during the initial push. The wounded man was lying right there on the stones. Both sides just stopped. It wasn't an order from an officer, it was just a collective realization. If we shot that medic, we were shooting the only thing in that valley that wasn't trying to destroy something. I remember looking at my squad leader, a guy named Henderson. He had his rifle up, but he was looking through the sights with his left eye closed, just watching. He whispered, "Look at that crazy kid." And he was a kid. He couldn't have been more than 17. He was fumbling with a bandage because his hands were shaking so hard from the cold and the fear. He stayed on that bridge for 20 minutes. 20 minutes of total silence. You could hear the creek bubbling underneath. You could hear the wind in the trees. It was the most peaceful 20 minutes of the whole damn war. When he was done, he picked up the wounded man, who was twice his size, and heaved him over his shoulder. He took one step, stumbled, then caught himself. He looked toward our side of the creek. He didn't wave, he didn't salute. He just stood there for a second, then turned and walked back into the woods. As soon as he was gone, a mortar shell landed in the water, and the war was back on. But for those 20 minutes, that stone bridge was the most sacred place on earth. I often wonder what happened to that boy. Did he make it through the next month? Did he get to go home and become a doctor for real? I'd like to think he did. I'd like to think he's out there somewhere, or maybe his children are, knowing that he lived because a bunch of tired Americans decided that mercy was more important than a body count. We didn't shoot because we knew that if we did, we were killing the best part of ourselves. You can't just turn your conscience on and off like a faucet. If you let it go completely, you never get it back. And I wanted to go back to my mother's house in Illinois and be able to sit at the dinner table without feeling like a ghost was sitting in my chair. It's funny how you remember the small things. I don't remember the names of the towns, but I remember the way the coffee tasted when it had been sitting in a canteen too long, metallic and bitter. I remember the sound of the rain hitting the canvas of the tents, and I remember the faces. Not the faces of the generals, but the faces of the men in the mud. There was a German sergeant we captured near the end. He was an older fellow, probably 40, which seemed ancient to us at the time. He'd been hit in the chest, and he was breathing with that wet, rattling sound that tells you a man's time is short. We had him in a shed behind a farmhouse. Our medic was busy with our own guys, so I stayed with him for a bit. I didn't have anything to give him but water. I held the canteen to his lips, and he took a sip. He reached into his tunic and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. It was a drawing, a child's drawing of a house and a sun with a smiley face. He pointed to it and said a name. I couldn't understand the name, but I understood the feeling. He wasn't a Kraut or a Jerry in that moment. He was just a father who was never going to see his kids' drawings again. I stayed with him until he stopped rattling. I didn't have to. I could have gone and found some dry socks or a hot meal, but I stayed because it felt like the right thing to do. It felt like if I left him alone in that shed, I was leaving a part of my own soul there too. When people ask why we didn't shoot the stretcher bearers, it's the same answer. Because every time you show a little bit of kindness to the enemy, you're reminding yourself that you're still a human being. And in a war, that's the hardest thing to remember. You're told to hate. You're trained to kill. You're conditioned to see the other side as something less than people. But the reality is always there, waiting for the smoke to clear. The reality is a child's drawing or a man carrying a friend. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I remember the liberation of a small camp near the end. It wasn't one of the big ones you see in the movies, but it was bad enough. The people in there, they weren't people anymore. They were just bones covered in skin. Seeing that, you'd think it would make us want to kill every German we saw, and for a few days it did. There was a lot of anger, a lot of rage, but even then, I saw something that changed my mind again. We had a group of German prisoners we were moving to a collection point. Most of them were just boys, 16 or 17 years old. They were crying. They were starving too. One of the survivors from the camp, a man who looked like he shouldn't even be able to stand, walked up to one of the German boys. He didn't hit him. He didn't spit on him. He just reached out and took a piece of bread that he'd been given and broke it in half. He gave half to the German boy. I watched that boy take the bread, and he started sobbing so hard he couldn't even eat it. If that man, who had suffered things I can't even imagine, could find it in himself to share his bread with the enemy, then who was I to hold on to my hate? It made me realize that mercy isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of incredible strength. It's easy to pull a trigger. It's hard to forgive. It's hard to look at someone who represents everything you're fighting against and see a person who needs help. We didn't shoot the stretcher bearers because we saw that strength in each other. We saw that even when everything else was gone, we could still choose not to be cruel. That's a powerful thing for a 19-year-old to learn. It's a powerful thing for a 92-year-old to remember. I've carried that lesson with me for 80 years. It's helped me through the hard times at home. It's helped me when I was angry at my neighbors or frustrated with the world. I just think back to that man in the camp and that boy with the bread. I think back to the medic on the bridge. And I realize that the world is a better place when we choose to hold our fire. The war ended for me in a hospital in England. I'd taken some shrapnel in my shoulder during a patrol, And by the time they got me out, the Germans had surrendered. I remember lying in that bed, listening to the people outside celebrating in the streets. There were bells ringing and people singing. It was a beautiful sound, but I couldn't join in. I just kept thinking about all the boys who wouldn't hear those bells. I thought about Miller and Crawford and Doc Shapiro, and I thought about the Germans too. I thought about the man at the well and the boy with the picture of his dog. I hoped they were hearing bells somewhere too. I hoped that they were going home to their mothers and their wives. People say the good war was simple, good guys versus bad guys, but it was never simple. It was messy and ugly and confusing. The only thing that made it bearable were those moments where the light broke through. Those moments of mercy that didn't make sense on a map but made all the sense in the world to the men on the ground. I'm glad I'm telling this now. I've kept it locked up for a long time, mostly because I didn't think anyone would understand. I didn't think people wanted to hear about the times we didn't fight. They want to hear about the heroics. But for me, the most heroic thing we ever did was knowing when to stop. Knowing when the war was over for a particular man, even if the world was still on fire. I hope my grandkids hear this. I hope they know that their grandfather wasn't just a soldier. He was a man who tried to stay a man. And that's the most important thing you can be. No matter what the world tells you, no matter what uniform you're wearing, you have to keep that light inside you. You have to protect it. Because once it's gone, the darkness is all there is. And the darkness is a lonely place to live. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I think about the land itself sometimes. The fields of France and the forests of Germany. I wonder if the grass is greener there because of all the boys we left behind. It's a grim thought, I know, but you can't help but think it when you've seen what I've seen. I hope that people walk over those fields now and don't feel the weight of it. I hope they just see the beauty. I hope they see the sunflowers and the wheat and the peaceful little towns. That's what we were fighting for after all. Not for the glory, but for the day when the noise would stop and the silence would be a good kind of silence. Not the silence of the aftermath, but the silence of a Sunday morning. I remember a girl I saw in a village near the end. She was maybe 5 years old. She was sitting in the middle of a ruined street, playing with a headless doll. She looked up at me as I walked by, and she didn't look scared. She just looked curious. I reached into my pack and gave her a small tin of fruit. She took it, and she gave me this tiny, shy smile. That smile stayed with me all the way across the Atlantic. It stayed with me through the years of working in the factory and raising my family. It reminded me that there was something worth saving, and that saving a life, any life, is always better than taking one, even if it's the enemy's life, especially then, because that's when it counts the most. That's when it shows who you really are. I'm an old man now, and my time is coming soon. I'm not afraid. I've lived a long life, a good life, and I can go to my grave knowing that I didn't add more suffering to the world than I had to. I can go knowing that there are people out there who lived because I decided to wait. Because I decided to lower my rifle, and that's enough for me. That's more than enough. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten.